Huggins. I'm the Social Impact Director at the Low Carbon Hub. And when I'm not doing that in my spare time, I volunteer with two community benefit societies, West Oxford Community Renewables and Bosley Lock Hydro. And really what I'll be talking today in terms of social environmental impact strategy and the kind of approaches we take is a really practical, on the ground approach from my perspective as being part of an organisation that's actually doing this day to day. And because as I say, my experience stems from trying to do this and learning as I'm going, I'm so thrilled that Mary Anderson from CAD Consultants, who's a real expert in this field, is also being able to join us today and give us some expert input into all of this. I do need to apologise in advance if there is cheering in the background or groaning going on in my household. Oxford United are in the playoffs against Portsmouth and they kicked off at 5, and so I'm sitting here in Oxford with two sons who are currently watching that, so apologies in advance. Hopefully there will be cheering is all I can say. Today's session, as Graham said, is really focused on producing a social and environmental impact strategy for your organisation. And it's divided into 4 sections, thinking about the impact that you want to achieve as your organisation, how you might go about achieving that, how will you know if you've been successful, and then what you do with those findings. If you've got questions, please use the chat as we go. Graham's going to be monitoring that for me, and if there's anything that's because I've just not been very clear or used an acronym, he'll ask me straight away. Otherwise, we've got 4 points at the end of each of those sections where we can really dive into any outstanding questions in more depth. And in terms of the purpose for this session, it's, for me, thinking about your impact strategy, it's an opportunity for you as an organisation to agree what's the difference that you want to be making, planning the activities that you're going to do to make that happen, how you collect the evidence to show that you've been successful. And the bit to me that's really the most important is what you then do with that knowledge and the evidence that you gather. So how you use it to learn and improve, how you can use it to demonstrate your impact to key stakeholders, how you might use that to attract new resources, and also really importantly to motivate yourself and others. And for me, that last thing, you're all spending a huge amount of your time and effort in running these organizations, and it's so important that you feel that in all that time and resource and effort and input that you're putting in, you're achieving something meaningful. And so your impact strategy is that opportunity to agree collectively what is that difference you want to be making for your community or to a broader level, and then giving yourself the feedback that all that effort really is worthwhile. I know that some of the groups here have been established for a long time, so you've probably already got quite a clear idea of what it is that you want to be achieving. So apologies if I'm going over anything from first principles that you've already got well embedded. But it's also, I do hope that even for those groups who some way down the process, that there's something valuable you can take from this. We find at the Hub that we're often so involved in the minutiae of what we're doing that just being able to sort of raise our heads up and look at the horizon and agreeing where we're trying to head can be really invaluable for us as a sort of a refresher to make sure we're all pointing towards the same spot on the horizon, and also making sure that we take a moment to reflect how well we're doing in terms of achieving our direction of travel. So 4 key areas that we're looking at, and starting out in terms of thinking what impact is it that you want to be achieving as an organisation. And I was going to start with just a little bit of terminology. I'm sure many of you will already be really already au fait with some of these terms, but sometimes terms like impact and outcomes can be a little bit confusing. So I found this as a really helpful cake making analogy, and very partial to cake, so it did really jump out to me, this one, just to help think through some of the terminology that you use when you're thinking about impact and monitoring and evaluation. So if you're trying to bake a cake, you need your inputs. So that might be your ingredients, your recipe, your cook, the oven that you're going to bake it in. You know, you need your resources. The activity is the actual process, all those steps that are involved in making cake, from cracking the eggs to putting it in the oven, letting it cool and icing it. Your output will be the cake itself, but the outcome, the impact that you're trying to achieve, is the difference that that cake makes. So you hope that by the end of your process, you've produced a really delicious cake that has made people have, it's been the highlight of a birthday party and helped somebody feel really appreciated, for example. That might be the actual outcome or output that you're outcome or impact that you're trying to achieve. And it's the same with our projects. So you've got the resources, and which might be the actual things you've got. So your resources are owning a solar park. It might be the land that you have access to, your volunteers, their expertise, the time, as well as money and grants that you have. The activity will be the generating of the electricity, or if you're interested in education, it might be the all the steps that you need to do to get some school children to come and see your site firsthand. The output will be those training sessions, or the activities that you're actually doing, the electricity that you've generated. The outcomes of the difference that that's made, and it might be environmental, economic, or social differences that you're looking at. So I hope you find that sort of little bit of a dive into the terminology useful. One final term, I'm not really going to refer to it much in this session, but you may sometimes hear people refer to a theory of change. And a theory of change is just a way of describing the mechanics, how these activities and outputs in your theory, how you think that it's going to bring about those outcomes, that impact that you want. So I can certainly share more links if people are interested in looking in more detail about the way theories of change can be set up and operate. So there are a few things that you can do when you're starting to think about the impact that you want to achieve. And the first thing is actually by setting out, looking at your own rules. Your rules will have a section which set out what it is that you are legally allowed to do as an organisation. Virtually all of these, any community benefit society should have rules very similar to the ones that we have written here. These are the low carbon hubs extract from our rules. And you'll see that they are written incredibly broadly. They should be a really, really broad envelope. But it is always worth going back, because if it's not in your rules, it's not actually something that you can do as a CBS. They're normally written incredibly broadly, in the same way that any charity will normally state its objects in a very broad way to allow for all possible eventualities. But it's a useful starting point just to touch on. The next is, particularly if you're already an established organisation, you may already have a mission or a vision or a purpose, which sets out what change you want to make in the world. So again, go and look through your documentation, see what you've already got. Don't need to always start from scratch. The Low Carbon Hub's purpose is to be a social enterprise that's out to prove we can meet our energy needs in a way that's good for people and good for the planet. And it took us about 5 years to come up with this quite simple statement. And it's interesting how just the nuances of a few words can be incredibly important. So by really thrashing this out in a very iterative process, some of the key words for us are things that, for example, here, that we're out to prove something. So what that meant is that it didn't mean we needed to do it all ourselves, but it did mean that we needed to, we felt as an organisation it was really important that proving meant doing. And so that single word, prove, meant that first of all, we weren't having to be all encompassing, but we needed to be providing real on the ground evidence. And that really helped us clarify what we thought our purpose was. And it's as much, not just the purpose, but also what your specific role might be in that you want to think about. So for us, again, that proving thing means that we we feel that our role is really important to be a catalyst. Other people might feel it's really important to actually be the doers and the deliverers at scale of something. So thinking as much about what are those outcomes that you want to achieve, but what your role is within that is really another thing just to consider. As a community benefit society, particularly one that's involved in community energy, sorry, it's also worth thinking about the different kinds of benefits. Sometimes they're referred to as co-benefits, but there's often a big argument with people who say, well, actually, they're not co-benefits, they are the benefits, they're not things on the side, they're the heart of what we're trying to achieve here. They tend to fall into 5 key categories. The first is often the immediate thing about generating green electricity. So you're saving carbon, and that's in the sphere of climate change, and your impact on climate change might be one area of co-benefits or benefits that you're looking to achieve. You might also be thinking in terms of what impact might you be having on your local environment. It might be very local in terms of the biodiversity of the site that you yourself manage, or it might be that through some of your other activities, maybe things that you're funding through your profits, that you're looking to improve the broader environmental local ecosystems that you're working in. Alongside those environmental benefits, there are some great economic impacts that you could be looking to deliver. Is it that you're looking to create job opportunities or volunteering and training and skills opportunities for local people? Is it that it's really important to you that the interest that you pay out to people, your investors, are being retained in the local area, which might change the way that you think about where your membership base should be? Because if you want more of that to be really targeted locally, that means you want to be raising more of your investment locally. It might be other social impacts. It might be about what you do with your community benefit funds in terms of addressing some of your local community needs. So tackling fuel poverty, or might be some other area of local social need that you really want to impact that's very pertinent to your area. And finally, it's becoming more and more apparent how important local community energy organisations are as part of the transition to a local decarbonised energy system. And in particular, it's that ability to engage people at a local level in thinking about energy and the part that they play in that transition. So it might be an attitudinal role that you have. So they're all different areas that you might be wanting to achieve some kind of impact. I've spoken a lot about what you want. At this stage, you might also be thinking about how you might involve your stakeholders. So who are those different people who are interested in your organisation or have a stake in what your organisation's doing? They could be board members, your volunteers, your investor members, could be funders. You may have, in fact, already effectively committed to delivering certain sorts of impact because of the funding that you've agreed to take on. It might be the regulators, or it could be much broader. So you might feel a commitment or be interested in understanding how the broader community energy sector, for example, might want to see community energies helping create a collective impact. So understanding who those stakeholders are, what their priorities and interests are, and what impact they're hoping that you're going to achieve. An interesting one with members is that actually you may have already set out what impact you're going to strive to achieve when you were putting together your share offer document. So it might be less about asking them from the get-go what they think you should be doing, and actually maybe more about them holding you to account about what you promised you'd be doing up front. So lots of different angles to start considering how you might be setting out and beginning to define what those outcomes that you're hoping to achieve are. And generally, I'd say you're aiming for about 4 to 6, and you might want to prioritize them. I noticed that Yeoman, your business plan, had put some prioritization of things that you'd like to support through your work. And when when these kind of outcomes that you have could be so broad ranging, one of the challenges for you is going to make sure that you stay focused onto what it's really feasible to deliver, not just what you'd like to deliver, and that prioritization can be really helpful. So that was a very quick whistle stop around thinking about some of the questions you might be asking yourself in terms of what it is that you'd like to achieve, what impact you as a group want to achieve. Just stopping here on questions, but also just to show you this is a Wordle. I don't know if any of you have ever come across a Wordle before, which is where you make a graphic based on the frequency of words. What we did is we asked all of our members as staff if they had to describe our organisation in 10 words, what would those words be? And we collated them all together. And the more frequently a word came up, the larger and bolder it comes up in this infographic. So it was just a nice exercise that we did just to begin to see which are the words that literally jump out when we start thinking about ourselves at the hub. So any questions at the moment?
We have none in the chat box at the moment, but if anyone has anything they'd like to ask, please do unmute yourself and fire away.
No, right, okay.
No, you've got one. You've got one from me. I'll just pop in if I can. It's Andrew from Yelm. I just wanted to say, Saskia, that this business of measuring impact and so on has been the bane of my life for a long time, because I haven't quite got to grips with it and nobody has been able to explain it. And you've done it in 15 minutes there beautifully.
Oh, that's really great feedback. Thank you so much.
No, that really just, it was going straight to my soul. The one thing I would beg is if I could have a copy of those slides, it would really help me focus on trying to do something that I thought was difficult, and now I think is a lot easier.
That's the thing. It's a lot of, I do find the terminology can really get you tied in knots. And if you just remember, it's what difference do we want to make? And start from there.
Well, also the other thing is, you know, the concentration on outputs and outcomes is exactly parallel to some of the things I've been doing in science. And I thought, why don't I just use my brain?
Right. I'm sure you're probably overthinking it. That's probably.
I am.
Probably.
It's quite obvious.
And as you see, so the slides are all going to be available. We'll signpost you to some examples, and there's some great simple guides out there as well we can signpost you to, and there will be some support available, so sort of one-to-one sessions on each of the different areas we're talking about, and Mary's been designing some great tools as well for you. So you know, there's going to be lots more support. Any more questions, or shall I move on?
Nothing in the chat box at the moment,
Okay.
so perhaps we can move on. And if anything, if anyone has any as we're moving through, just drop them in the chat box.
I'm just writing one.
Okay, on you go.
While you're at it, yeah, which is, shall I take it out of the chat box and ask
Go for it, Penny.
Yeah, I vaguely recollect meeting models. I really like the way that basically you seem to be saying outcomes equals impact. I think I've come upon models in the past which distinguish between outputs as one thing, outcomes as another thing, and impact as a third thing.
Different people use the terms in different ways, and I say I can tie myself in knots about the terminology, but as I say, I just keep coming back to the what's the difference. Now, outcomes tend to be described as things like we'd like more of this or less that or this to have changed, rather than they tend not to be sort of what you'd consider smart objectives, which is what often the outputs are. But yes, it's a grey area, and I'm sure Mary might be able to tell us a technical distinction.
Yeah, but if you're saying just stick to outputs and outcomes, that's nice and straightforward.
Yeah, that's what I use.
I think if Penny's right that you can split the hairs further, and you know, you can distinguish between outcomes which are kind of more achievable within the frame of a project, and then impacts that are longer term. So I don't know what you might say, well, everybody sitting around eating the cake and having a nice full stomach is the outcome, and then the impact is they all feel better about each other or something. It's kind of
Or
slightly
increased childhood obesity, yes.
well, yes, that might be a negative impact.
Yes.
But I think eliding outcomes and impacts is no problem if that makes it simpler. But if you go further along the scale towards abstraction and further in time, it's kind of outputs, outcomes, and then impacts, as it were.
And for me, the most important thing is that you have a shared idea of what you're trying to get to. And I think particularly in the community energy world, the one where whether you're driven by actually the carbon and climate change, or if you're driven by actually having an income stream that's helping at a social level that might not be environmentally at its heart in your locality, that neither is right or wrong. They're just different approaches. But if you can find yourself sometimes being at odds if you as an organisation haven't had that as an explicit discussion. And so spending the time to be explicit in exploring what it is that would be success for you is the thing that I'd really encourage you to do, rather than worrying if it's an outcome or an impact. So the second section was just going to be a real whistle stop. Oh, sorry, I just need to get my computer working. Glide through thinking about how you might actually achieve some of these. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of details because a lot of this will come out of your business planning. But the main thing I want to say here is that the impact that you have is actually to do with all the activities that you're doing. Often people think about the impact in terms of just what they achieve with the community benefit fund, but for me it's everything. It's whether or not it's the generating asset, you as volunteers and your interactions, right through to what you do with your profits. So if I was approaching this, I'd start by saying, well, what are our resources that's available to us? So you've got the generating asset, you've often got a piece of land that you have access to, you've got your membership base, the times and skills of all your volunteers, and also the networks that you sit in. All those contacts that you have locally can be a really valuable asset that you have. Then often a SWOT analysis is a good thing to do at this stage. You're understanding what your strengths are as an organisation, what, perhaps just delving into where you think you might have some weaknesses, and that might simply be something that maybe you just don't have a very big membership base yet, for example, or you currently don't have as many volunteers as you'd like, might be a weakness that you need to address. And then looking at the opportunities and threats which tend to be external to your organisation. So who else do you know in your community? What other activities are happening that you might be piggybacking on? What else is happening in the local networks and communities? And at this stage, I also think we've always found that actually acknowledging where people's enthusiasms lie can be really important at this stage. If you've got a volunteer who's really keen to do something and they've got a real passion for an area, and you're trying to decide between prioritising two different areas, go where the enthusiasm is. It's, I think, understanding that if there's some real drive to make something happen, that's a really valuable asset that you've got there. Prioritising your activities, again, as volunteers, I think one of the biggest things I learned in my early days with Ocean Lock Hydro in particular was realising that we didn't have to do everything that everyone suggested to us. And if we were saying no, we didn't necessarily mean no, not at all. It might just be a question of no, not now. And giving yourself permission to say, that's a really great idea, I love it, but you know what, we just need to focus on these three things this year, and that's something we're going to do another time. It's perfectly acceptable, but can be quite hard to give yourself that permission. being realistic about what you can undertake as well. When you're prioritising, it's not your job to take everything on, and it's better to do a few things well, I feel, than the feeling you have to try and address everything now and at once. So identifying what are those quick wins that might quickly enable you to feel like you're achieving, and that can demonstrate that you're already having results towards your particular outcome. And then identifying what are those big opportunities that may take a lot more effort and a lot more planning, but you'd be really missing out, and trying to understand those within their right time frames. So onto time frames as well. It's a great exercise I did with actually Westmill wind farm when I was doing a bit of work with them. I was actually saying, well, what does success look like? So we know what overall we want to achieve. We want to perhaps massively reduce fuel poverty, but what does that actually mean? What would success feel like in 1 year's time or in 3 years' time? So you can begin to put some realistic targets on what you want to do. Another area to consider is leverage. Mentioned all those resources that you already have at your disposal, but it's what you can then leverage with those. If I give you the example from the Low Carbon Hub, our community benefit fund this year, just for the last financial year I was looking at, we spent around £40,000 of community benefit income, which were generated by our generating assets. But with those, when you added up all the things that we managed to then use, because we had that core of funding and because we could use it as match funding, we've actually delivered just over £1 million worth of programme, using that small kernel to leverage other people's funding and expertise and tapping into people's networks. So thinking about how you can tactically use the resources that you directly control to align other people's resources to help you achieve that overall aim. And part of that is thinking through your delivery strategy as well, the things that you're going to want to run and deliver yourself. But particularly, again, when you're a volunteer organisation, being realistic about what you can have to deliver with your own time versus what it might be that you might want to put a bit of money just to buy in some skills. So it's not all about your own time and on your shoulders. It might be about who you give those grants to, because if you can put in that grant funding, you enable another organisation to leverage all of their skills and contacts to do the thing that they perhaps already have real expertise in. And it's also the power of partnerships. And I'm just going to give you a quick example of that. Oh, sorry, trouble with my slides again. There we go. So the Low Carbon Hub, we have the map here on the right. All those orange dots are where we have a solar roof-mounted solar PV array, and they're all on schools. And we felt it was really important that, as well as directly helping schools to reduce their fuel bills and their carbon footprint by generating green electricity on their roofs, which we were then selling to them at a discount so they had lower bills, we thought we should be doing a lot more with this opportunity. But no, we're not educational experts. We didn't know a great deal about energy efficiency, but we knew that it was really important that they address energy efficiency alongside what they were doing. We had direct contact with our schools that were hosting our PV arrays, but we knew that they just represented a really small drop in the ocean in terms of the schools across Oxfordshire. So we wanted to see how we could work with other organisations in the county to help schools not only reduce their overall carbon footprint, and not just our schools, but all the schools in the county, but also use that as an opportunity to engage with staff and with the students to help them have a better understanding of climate change and their impact on that. So we work with a huge number of partnerships now with schools. So we have our contacts. We have the solar arrays, which meant that we had a very small amount of money as well that we could donate. But by working with, I'll give you an example. Let's see. So Oxfordshire County Council have regular communications with all the grant maintained schools across the county. So suddenly, by working with them, we could reach 300 schools, not just our 30 schools that we had links with. Westmill, who are another community energy organisation, and they have the Westmill Sustainable Energy Trust. They have a large ground-mounted solar, and they have wind turbines on their site. They have a phenomenal educational officer. And we've discovered that she's produced these amazing educational resources on biodiversity, sustainable energy, and energy plans. And so rather than us having to make our own educational materials, we could just simply distribute her materials and signpost people to their existing materials. We gave a grant to an organisation called Kids Can, which was set up by volunteers in Oxfordshire. They're an extraordinary story. A local mum was horrified when her daughter came back from school one day in tears saying, "Mum, my teacher said I used too much glue stick, and as a result my grandchildren are going to die in 2050. She had completely mixed up in her mind various environmental messages she was given at school, and in a way that she'd internalized in a really way that frightened her and made her fearful for the future. So we were able to give Kids Can a small grant which enabled them to develop and a series of materials specifically for key stage 2 children to help them understand the difference that they can make in a much more empowering and less scary way in terms of tackling climate change, and to better understand that. So again, we didn't have the expertise, but they had the vision, we had a small amount of funding. And then in terms of energy efficiency, we did want to really encourage our schools to use less energy. And we discovered that the charity Ashton have been running a scheme called Less CO2, which is providing a year-long set of workshops to help schools improve their energy performance. They had funding to pay for the trainers and to run the programme, but they didn't have contacts with schools. So we have been working with Oxfordshire County Council, with all these other organisations, to sign up schools to take part in the Ashton programme. So we were able to put in our 30 contact schools, a little bit of funding, and again, our networks, and tapping into these networks to create what is now quite a holistic schools support partnership across Oxfordshire. That's a massive amount of impact that can be achieved by lots of different organisations putting bits together, rather than us on our own. Had we gone to try, we would never created these amazing resources. We would have never managed to deliver such a professional energy performance programme. And sorry, I should also say Westmill Solar have now put in some of their grant funding to offer those schools really in-depth audits. So by pooling those resources collectively, we're achieving a lot more than we would have done individually. So talked a lot about some of the activities that you could do, but also worth thinking a little bit about the values and principles that underpin what you're doing. It isn't just what you're doing, but it's how you do it. And the principles that I've got listed here about maximising leverage, trying to make a tangible difference, things that are visible, lasting, replicable and scalable, and in a way that is community focused, inclusive and collaborative. These principles were actually first developed in conjunction with, we're owned by 27 local low carbon volunteer groups, and we were setting out our grant giving programme, wanting to think how we could best use our community grants to support their work. And so we did a co-design workshop with them to say, how would you like us to be using our grants? What kind of difference would you like it to make, and what should we have running through this as our ethos? And so that's where those principles came through. It was in conjunction with them, and actually we've now adopted those as the principles that underpin all of our work. And by having that in our minds about what's the way we're going to deliver this, these particular activities, what's our approach to them, has really helped colour and helped us hone down those activities and the way that we do them, all of which I presume are going to be part of your business plan. So I wasn't going to dive into them in any more detail, but hopefully that was just a very useful run through about some of the things you can think about in terms of how you actually deliver this impact. So Graham, that's our next natural break.
Okay, thanks very much, Saskia. We have no additional questions arrived in the chat box, so I guess we'll open up to the floor if anyone has anything they'd like to ask.
Hi, it's Rachel here.
Hi.
Yeah, thanks. That was great, really interesting. I think that when I looked at the business plan, you'd commissioned a report on Oxfordshire low carbon economy.
Yes.
Start the process as an input, I guess, to your business plan. And it sounds like that was quite influential in shaping your approach overall. Can you talk us through the extent to which you use that to feed into your social and environmental strategy, or whether that sort of came later and as a separate piece of work?
So the low carbon economy report, it was actually produced by Oxford University as part of a collaboration called Oxfordshire that we were leading. And so what was really useful for that was that it was a piece of academic research that looked to see what could be the particularly economic impact of addressing or thinking about our local economy through a low carbon lens, understanding the number of people whose jobs relied on the industry or could be improved, and getting a sense of the scale of Oxfordshire and its energy needs. And I'd say it was useful from a number of perspectives. One was that it just the process of doing it with both the local universities and with the local councils was a way of really beginning to build around a collective vision of what might be possible. So just that process of doing it together, and it was collectively owned by all those groups. So it created a really nice sort of starting point. It's also interesting for us at that time, we were trying to win round some key players in the county, and for them it was all about the economics. Show us the business case. So to bring on board certain groups, it was useful. And then I guess in terms of the social impact, for us it was helping baseline where we were and beginning to understand what the targets might be, which we'll get onto in the next section. Yeah, I've got to say, Barbara Hammond, my colleague, was much more involved in that particular piece of work. So if anyone's interested in diving more into that piece, and I think it was 2014 now that came out, but it's amazing how often have that document still referred to and being able to point at it as something where we all had a common vision about where we could go forward, and understanding about where we were starting from was really helpful. Any other questions? No? Right, so if it's all right, I am going to whiz on to the next section, which is how will you know if you've been successful? So, having set out your vision, you've carried out these activities. What is it that you're now going to have to do to actually know if you're getting there? So these are just some real headliners, and I'll delve into a few more in a bit more detail. But just starting from, what is it that is being assessed? What is it that you are going to measure as your success measure? So you know what your outcome is, but identifying clearly what it is that is going to tell you you're being successful, and identifying that really early on in the process. it's much harder to start to collect evidence if you haven't built it in from day one. So you should be thinking about your monitoring and your evaluation and your learning right at the point at which you're actually setting up your activities, rather than trying to do it retrospectively. So mention what evidence you're going to need to collect to show that you've been successful. I'll talk a little bit more about baseline information. Again, it's that little bit of time and energy that you can spend right up front to know what your starting point is really key. And also, if you already have targets or forecasts, so that you know where you should be heading, so you can see, are you getting there, is very critical. Unintended impacts. We mentioned this earlier with the cake. An unintended impact would be that we come out of lockdown and none of us can fit into our work clothes anymore because we ate all the cake. And so it's not just thinking about how you're collecting the positive impacts, but are there any unintended impacts that you need to measure? And alongside that, there's this point of additionality, which is saying, what difference did we make? If our organisation hadn't been involved, quite a lot of this stuff might have happened anyway. If you think of the Oxfordshire schools example, we're just one small player in that. So what extra difference, what additionality did we add? We don't want to overclaim. Particularly when we make grants to other organisations, there's nothing more galling than when your grant giver says, look what we achieved, and actually, all we've done for our community groups is provide the money. They've put in all of the effort and had the vision and delivered it all. It's their contacts, it's yes, as I say, it's their vision and their enthusiasm that made it happen. So being really careful not to overclaim. And also thinking about proportionality. Mary will talk a bit more about this, how you make sure that you don't end up trying to measure absolutely everything because you can, or creating such onerous monitoring and evaluation processes in place that it takes up what little resource you already have, and so you actually end up doing less of what would make you successful. So
Saskya, we've just had a question, sorry to jump in there, just had a question come in about KPI, and just in case anyone else was wondering.
Yes, that's, sorry, key performance indicators, and my next slide's a little bit more about those. So thinking about how often you'll measure things, and how you're going to measure them, where you'll collect them, where you'll store them. If it's personal information, are there any GDPR considerations? Do things need to be password protected? What permissions do you need if it's to do with personal details of people? And then how you're actually going to evaluate it. So that was a very brief overview, but I will dive into a few of those. And the first thing was talking about key performance indicators. So a key performance indicator, or KPI, is what it kind of says on the tin. What are those things that will give you an indication that you have started to deliver, that you are performing? And this is an example from the power to change employability hypothesis. So power to change have a number of outcomes that they're looking to achieve through all the projects that they support. And this is an example of one. So in terms of employability, they're looking for, underpinning their work is this hypothesis that community businesses improve skill development amongst local people by creating jobs and providing development opportunity for those who might otherwise not actively participate in the labour market. And in fact, this is, I mentioned theory of change. This is quite a good example of a theory of change approach, where they've set out the difference that they want to make and how the activities and the outputs that you are doing will actually contribute towards that. And so power to change for that particular employability outcome have identified a number of key performance indicators which they have identified as things that will help them understand if they are achieving that impact that they want. So how many people is a project directly, and how many of those are from the local area? how many jobs have been created by the Community Benefit Fund, and this point about additionality, how much of this employment is actually attributable to the programme, because they need to separate what was going to happen anyway from the difference that their programme has made. Then looking at the skills development, or whether or not it's helped people participate more actively in the labour market. And some of those are quite simple things that you might count, but something like, how do you know if somebody's participated more actively in a labour market? That's beginning to get a little bit more complicated in terms of how you might assess that. So in terms of some of that assessing, some of it will just be down to counting things. And I once went to an impact monitoring workshop, and a lot of the other organisations there were very much focused on social change, and they were absolutely green with envy that I worked for an environmental organisation that was all about generating electricity, because they said it's so unfair. You've got something really easy to count. You can count the amount of electricity you generate. That's a really tangible output, and then you've got the money that your profit. We're sitting there trying to figure out if we've helped people get back into work. That's a much harder thing to try and measure. So they were very envious of us having these what to them were very tangible things, KPIs that could be measured. And certainly at the Low Carbon Hub, we do count lots of things. We count the number of installations that we've got and how much they're generating. So we have our planet measures. We have our people measures, which is about the number of people who've invested in us or are hosting our organisations, or the number of community groups that we're working with. Our prosperity measures, which are to do with how much capital we've raised and how much that's then translated to interest being earned for our investors or savings for our host organisations, and the community benefit that overall we hope to be generating from those projects. So there's lots of things that we could be monitoring and counting. The fourth area is a perception survey, which is not just us saying how, can we count the things, our outputs, but this is saying to our stakeholders, do you think we're doing what we set out to do? So Mary talked more about surveys, but not, are we doing what we said we do? Do you believe us when we say that we're committed? Tell us if you are. This year, I have to say, we had 99%, which we were very, very pleased about. And the 1% was somebody who, if you read all their other answers, we think might have misread the scale and got it the wrong way around, but that was their answer. So we had to take it at face value. So there's lots of monitoring that's happening and is already happening for you guys in terms of your generating assets. You might also be looking at your financial records, doing desk analysis, surveys, biodiversity, so that local impact on ecosystems, having a baseline survey is something I understand that's going to be carried out at each site. So that's brilliant. You're already going to have that information to know what the starting point was. You might be gathering information about event attendees, who's attended, the types of people that have attended. I think Power to Change have a tool called Twine, which can help you very quickly get people who attend an event to register and fill in a quick survey for you. All I've talked about so far is very much quantitative measures, but sometimes you can feel that when you're counting these things, and we struggle with this at the Low Carbon Hub, often what we're counting is it's output measures that might not get under the skin of what we're trying to achieve. And that's where qualitative assessment really comes in. Case studies, getting to people to spend a little bit more time giving you much longer feedback about the difference that they think you're making. Videos and photos. I've seen some wonderful photos already in some of the case studies that have been created in conjunction with some of the groups. And things like press cuttings, collecting those press cuttings can be very useful evidence. It might be about column inches, which seems to me slightly odd that press cuttings are measured in terms of how long they were rather than the quality or the tone of the article. But all these things can be collected as evidence. And so once you know what you're trying to, once you've agreed what it is that you want to achieve, agreeing what are the right indicators to collect, without getting carried away that just because you can count everything doesn't mean you have to. I've certainly tied myself in knots with overcomplicated monitoring and then going, I've collected all this information and actually I'm not going to use it for anything. I just collected it because I could, rather than thinking through what's the crucial bits, because this does all take time. Talked a little bit about baselining. This is from the Westmill Solar Cooperative, and the dark blue line is what they were forecast to generate, and the pale blue is what they've actually generated. And so, data of itself is, you can collect and you can say, oh, we've generated this much electricity this month, but if you don't know what you're anticipating to generate, you don't know whether or not that's a good or bad answer. So this is by beginning to put things into graph formats and seeing, for example, July, what was happening in July? That looks phenomenal, but who knows why June last year wasn't so good for them. You can start asking questions and trying to understand what's going on. And by having targets or forecast, again, have you achieved 100% generation targets? It's beginning to lead into the useful thing about this monitoring, which is actually what you then do once you have some information. Again, great news that Bright are collecting lots of information for you. So they are already looking at your output and the amount of electricity generated and seeing how that's doing compared to here over on the right hand side, the percentage of target. So are you doing as well as you should be? And the fact that they're collecting that and giving it to you in a useful manner is great, because that can take quite a lot of time. So I was just going to hand over now to Mary, who's going to talk a little bit more about some of those tools that you might be using to do your monitoring. Mary, over to you.
Okay, I'll put my video on again and hope that my broadband can stand it. If I start going wobbly, I'll put the video off. So thanks so much, Saskia, because you've given a very broad and very insightful introduction to impact monitoring. And I know, seeing the names on the call, I know that a lot of you are doing this already. So please contribute your ideas and challenge what I'm going to say. What I want to draw your attention to is tools that are already out there and processes that are going to happen for the next generation program, which will help you to do some of that measuring work. Saskia's already referred to the Bright survey, the Bright monitoring, the monthly monitoring reports that they prepare on the generating assets, which will give you some of the hard numbers in terms of kilowatt hours and so on. I think I'm right in saying they do that on a monthly basis, so that somebody, either you or us or somebody, needs to add it all up if you're looking on a more annual basis. The reason I'm chipping in here is that CAG is contracted by Power to Change to evaluate the next generation program. We started about a year ago and we'll be carrying on for the next year or two, hand in hand with the next generation program, helping to monitor and evaluate the program level impacts. And obviously that also involves understanding what's happening at individual project level. So I want to take you through what Power to Change will ask of you, how I hope the evaluation can help you, and then talk finally about some of the wider sector level tools that are available through Community Energy England. So if you just flick onto the next slide, Saskia. As organisations who receive support grants from Power to Change, you will be surveyed annually. I think you will have groups like Yelm, Andrew, where you've had your support grant for some time. You will probably have completed a survey form at the beginning of the grant process. And this focuses not on energy stuff, but on some of those economic variables that Saskia mentioned earlier. So from Power to Change's point of view, they have various hypotheses about how their support for community businesses will help to develop skills in the community, help develop the capacity of the community, and so on. And by answering the questions in that survey, that will be, if you like, a repository for some of the basic economic and skills development indicators that may be important to your social impact strategy as well. They may not, you may not be interested in that at all, but with Power to Change being interested in them and you being grantees of Power to Change, you need them as a minimum to fill in their survey on an annual basis. And in the programme evaluation, knowing that you're completing this survey, we will try not to ask you the same questions. We will try to get hold of that, that data via the survey that Power to Change does. If I move on to the next slide, this just explains a little bit about how the evaluation works. We've got an iterative approach to evaluating the Next Generation programme. So starting in the top right-hand blob, we as an evaluation team will look at monitoring, basic monitoring data that you provide via CSE, the stuff that comes through from Bright, and the stuff that comes through from Power to Change. And we'll also undertake about once every 6 months, we'll ring you up or come and visit you and find out more about what's going on in your organisation, what you're doing, what you're hoping to achieve. So Andrew, I think you've been through that process in Yelm once. We haven't yet done that with Kent and the Telford Shropshire groups because you're just starting off. But we will be there along the journey to find out how it's going. And we'll also, in the next, moving down to the next blob, down the right-hand side of the that image, we will be able to help provide some support for you if you're wanting to do more detailed research. And I'll come on in a moment to talk about some of the tools that we've prepared that might help you, let's say, find out more about the impacts of your grants for community benefit groups, or provide support if you wanted to do a survey of your members or something like that. So hope we can't do it for you, but we can hold your hand, we can provide support, and we can, in limited circumstances, actually undertake research. So for instance, for Yelm and White, in the last cycle, we actually did some interviews with some in-depth interviews with some of the beneficiaries from the Community Benefit Fund, and helped to develop some case studies, which hopefully will be useful not just to Power to Change and the Next Gen programme, but also to Yelm and White as groups, that they can share that with funders or share that with stakeholders. So I'm leaping on to find the bottom one, right at the bottom, findings from the evaluation being shared with you. I think we've probably endlessly shared that case study with Andrew, asking him whether it's okay to change this word and change that word, but making sure it really represents what the group feels. And we've also, we don't want to scare the new groups at the moment, but we have, from our review of desk information from Bright and from Environmental Finance, we have been developing a basic set of indicators against our evaluation framework, which when you're ready, we can share with you to show you what we think we know about the projects under your care. So moving up around the left-hand side of the circle, Power to Change publishes at least a summary of the evaluation report that we prepare. So that the first year's evaluation report executive summary has just been published. The detailed report is a little bit more internal, so that isn't being published this time. But the case studies are about to be published in liaison with Community Energy England to share that learning more widely within the community energy sector. So webinars, this is a kind of internal facing webinar. As you know, CSE is also running innovation webinars, events for the wider sector, sharing the learning from the Next Gen programme more widely. And through that sort of discussion, through questions you ask now, we hopefully will identify some of the topics that you'd like us to focus on in future evaluation research. I see that Penny has said in the chat that Bright pull together annual data for Orchard Community Energy. So yes, it's much more useful if you get it in annual forms. And Penny's also saying that in the extra grants that were given by Kent Community Energy in response to the COVID response, grantees you weren't allowed to impose any additional requirements on the existing impact data that they provided. I think that probably, you're asking, was that a whopper, Penny? I don't think it was a whopper. I think it depends what strings are attached to particular grants when they're made. And I think one of the things I was going to mention in one of the later slides is you do have to have you do have to be proportionate in what's asked in terms of monitoring requirements, that you can kill the benefit of a grant over a few £100 if you attach lots of strings to it. So maybe when we come on to the questions, Penny, you might explain a little bit more about your point there. So I mentioned that we have an evaluation framework. So Saskia, if you could show slide 24. I've highlighted that there are 5 elements in the evaluation framework, and I've highlighted in blue the bits that you'll have most to do with. So moving around from the left to the right, some of what we're looking at relates to Power to Change's wider hypotheses. So kind of, in a way, their theory of change, but Power to Change the whole. The next blob, the first of the blue ones, about what are the outcomes and impacts from individual projects. So that's absolutely at the heart of what you'll be looking at. So hopefully we can work in partnership there, that you may want to look at things that are above and beyond the next generation activities. You may be interested in impacts which are very much focused on carbon and climate change, or maybe, as Saskia said, you're particularly interested in wider social benefits in the local community. But so there'll be overlap with what the Next Gen evaluation is looking at. We can hopefully jointly look at some of those issues and maybe help you with some of the questions, but your outcomes and impacts will be part of your wider strategy on social and environmental impact and may go beyond what we're looking at. The other blue blob that we'll talk to you about is how well do you think the Next Gen programme is working? Because if you like, at every level, everybody has their own theory of change. Power to Change has a theory as to what impact they're trying to make, difference they're trying to make. The Next Generation programme and CORE have theories. We've developed a theory of change which we think roughly captures what CORE and Next Gen grant support are trying to do, and will be trying to assess how well that's working. And that will feed into the next two orange blobs. How well is the Next Gen program working, and how well is learning from the program being shared effectively? So if you like, you've almost got kind of three levels, or no, I won't put them up and down. Okay, three scales: the power to change scale, the Next Gen and core scale, and then your project scale. And your interest will be, I presume, mainly at the project scale, and we'll come and talk to you about that level of scale. So just coming on to the next slide, I see somebody said trying to avoid reinventing wheels. I entirely agree with you there. In the spirit of not inventing wheels, I would point you towards Community Energy England's social impact tool. This will help you to ask some of the basic questions, or help you collate basic information on impacts in a way that's consistent with other groups in England, other community energy groups. So for instance, if you're wanting to convert, you'll have the kilowatt hour information from your solar assets through Bright. If you want to convert that to carbon, and want to do it in a way that's consistent with other groups in England, the Community Energy England's social impact tool will help you to do that. It asks some basic questions about whether you have a biodiversity plan. It doesn't get much beyond kind of, yes, we've got it, and this is the actions it includes. And it asks about how your community benefit fund is allocated between different types of initiatives, different, you know, does it all go on energy efficiency initiatives, or is it on wider social initiatives, and so on. So it doesn't go into a lot of depth on some of those things, but it's free to Community Energy England members. It can give you a basic framework. And I think one of the things that it helps to do is to make sure that Community Energy England and the wider sector is in touch with what the impacts are, and that the impacts are being collected in a consistent format. So it's worth finding out about that. It's not exactly, you can't kind of literally download the tool online. You need to email Community Energy England, but we'd encourage you to have a look at that and see if it's useful to you. And it's framed as a survey that you complete as a group, and then other surveys that you can, I must say, very short surveys that you could give to your volunteers or give to sites where you have solar panels sited. Coming on to the next slide, having looked at the community energy tool, we kind of felt that there are one or two gaps in it. And so we've developed some tools currently very much in draft form, and we would just love to pilot these with some of you over the next 6 months, a year, whatever. One of them is a survey for Community Benefit Fund beneficiaries. Given Penny's point, I agree that there would have to be, you would have to have permission to go back to them, make sure the door was open for asking them more questions. And I know that Yelm have already done a lot of this, that you, Andrew, you have been monitoring every 6 months or every 12 months how the grants have been spent and what they've achieved. But for other groups, that if you're interested, if you've got the appetite to do something there, this is we've got a draft survey. We'd be delighted to give you a hand getting that set up. Possibly of less relevance to you at the moment, the service users. If you have services that go beyond solar assets, you might want to survey users and get feedback from them, both in terms of marketing and in terms of levels of satisfaction as well as impact. And then finally, we think that the Community Energy England tool is quite limited in what it asks from volunteers, members and supporters. So we've developed a survey that could go a bit further if you had the appetite to do that. So that's, I think, all I wanted to say. And I know that time is moving on. So there are a few questions on this section. So shall I hand back to you, Saskia?
Yeah, Graham, have you been monitoring chat? Are there particular questions we should take now?
We've had a few comments come in. I don't, sort of general comments. I don't know if we've got any specific ones past the comments that we've already had.
Scanning those, it does seem that be useful to understand where we might be with Community Energy England membership for everyone. Is that an action you'd be able to follow up?
Yeah, I can definitely do that. Yeah.
Graham, you need to talk to, I think you need to talk to Richard, Environmental Finance, about that.
Okay, I will put that on my
or start by talking to Andre at Environmental Finance, because he's probably easier to get hold of.
Sure. Okay, I'll maybe drop you an email about this afterwards.
Yeah.
Penny.
So if it's all right, then
sorry, Saskia, I think we've got a question coming in there from Andrew, and we've had another one pop up into the chat box as well.
Okay. Well, if I may just pop in there, one of the interesting things that keeps coming up with Power to Change is the business of local employment. It has been touched on in some of the slides just going on, and thinking about what you can do for that. And I must say, in my conversations, while I have with them on it, while I have a great deal of sympathy, it is a jolly difficult thing to do, particularly at this time when we're trying to get so much into our heads.
Good job I haven't got my microphone on, isn't it? Oh, I do have my microphone on.
Right. Anyway, I would just making the point that I think that's an extraordinarily useful long-term goal, and it is something that we need to be prodded on a regular basis.
And the great thing is that if you've got that identified as a goal, that means that the steps and the activities that you take, you would make that an explicit aim of what you were trying to achieve. And as you say, it can be a really tough one. But I know at the Low Carbon Hub, which did grow out of entirely volunteer-run organisations, it's one of Barbara's proudest things is that we now have 16 members of staff that's come about as a result of that. So yeah, it's, I'm grateful as one of the people benefiting from that.
But I think it's worth saying, sorry.
I was just going to say, it's not just about local employment, I would suggest. I mean, what I'm very conscious of is that there are consultants, relevant consultants in Kent, and relevant consultants who live outside Kent, and the ability to, where possible, use, strengthen the local businesses by providing them with customers rather than have people coming over the border, where that is the appropriate thing to do.
And again, if you want that to be one of your explicit outcomes, by stating that up front, again, it makes you be able to think about the way that you run your activities and programs in a way that really reinforces that and then measures that from the outset. So yeah, that's, as you're saying, that those kind of nuances, as the more you can highlight what difference you want to make at a local level, and some of those economic and social ones can be the ones that are quite hard to pinpoint and express early on. If you can start to do those, and that's the other thing with these outcomes, is that you can refresh and change them and refine them as you go through. So
although of course the other side of the coin is that if we try to do everything locally, we pass up on economies of scale, and we fail to strengthen the community energy sector, across the UK. Yeah. So it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah. And I think I don't know, Andrew, whether this was behind your comment. The fact that Power to Change is very focused on local economy doesn't dictate that Yelm Community Energy has to be very focused on local economy. You know, those happen to be their indicators. You've got to decide what your priorities are.
Oh yes, I mean I take that on board. I mean, yeah, you can be quite sure that Young Community Energy is makes up its own mind on these things, but it is an interesting thing, the whole business of people living and working and thriving, doing different things in a locality. And certainly from my experience in Oxfordshire, not too far from where the low carbon hub is situated, it's genuinely, it can be genuinely transformative when you get a few people working in a community and having their own businesses in a community. Their attitude to the locality changes. So there are real positive benefits from it, but it's a long-term thing.
Yep. So on that very good point. Last section, just over 10 minutes left. I really wanted to focus on what you're going to do with your findings. It takes a lot of effort to collate all of this, and so if you can think from the outset how you might use the information that you collate and gather as you're monitoring, and how you might use this evidence, it can help you really, again, refine what it is that you're collecting. Certainly this is an example of a survey that we used to send every year to our members. And after 2 years, I cut several of the questions from it because I was aware that we were collecting information that we never even got around to analysing. And it was a question that we'd put in there because we could, and we thought, well, maybe we should ask this, but because we hadn't thought through how we'd use that information, we were wasting our members' time getting them to think about a question which actually we then didn't put to any good use. So as I said, this particular survey is one that we do, which is for our members. And one of the biggest and most important things I think you can do as you're collecting your evidence and evaluating is about learning and improving. It might be something as basic as if you're seeing that your energy, your solar park isn't generating what's anticipated. So for us, if one of our solar roofs isn't hitting its expected generation, but all the others are, that's a trigger point to go and actually explore what's happening on that site. So knowing what was expected and why we, what's caused that gap. So sometimes it's just very simple. The numbers don't look what you're the same, and so knowing what you then do when you've got that bit of information. The example from our survey in terms of learning and improving, the very first time we sent round our survey, the last question is just, what else would you like to tell us? It's a very open-ended question. Is there anything else you'd like to say? And within it, there were a lot of comments such as these on the left, where people just were able to vent and go, basically, your shareholder communications are rubbish, is, in a nutshell, what a number of people told us, some more politely than others. And so that really highlighted for us an area that we needed to improve. So the following year, we thought about how could we better demonstrate to a really key stakeholder group, our investors, how their particular investment is making a difference. And so we started producing annual performance summaries, which look for their portfolio that they'd invested in, a snapshot of how those solar arrays were doing in generation, but also in terms of giving an idea of the overall income that it generated, and also reminding them some key facts, because we might have remembered all the exact terms of their investment portfolio, but it wasn't fair for us to expect them to remember every detail, and so finding a way just to keep communicating that back to them. So from that one survey, we spent a whole year thinking, how did we improve our communication with our members through things like this, the impact surveys, and the best tests that we had that this had actually made a difference was that the following year we didn't have a single negative comment in terms of people asking questions or feeling uninformed about how their investment was doing. So yeah, thinking first of all how you learn, but then also how you are going to demonstrate that impact. Your stakeholders have normally given you some form of resource or invested some effort in you. So it would be, you know, thinking, how do you feedback that success? Another thing that you can do, and this is where with the hub we found it incredibly useful, is as you begin to have a track record, how can you then demonstrate that to attract more resources? People, if you can show people that you're already good at delivering, that you can fulfill the promises that you've made, that you're already making a difference, success breeds success. So thinking about how you display the information that's available to you. So instead of just saying how much electricity we've generated this year, actually putting it in the context to show how our portfolio has grown. So these bar charts showing a lovely sort of year-on-year improvement in terms of the amount of generation that we're doing is a lot more meaningful for that track record. I love this extract from the Yale business plan, which talked about only 1,000 people to have directly impacted on the lives of 1,000 people is brilliant, but not knowing the area, it was only when I then read that that's 1 in 20 people living in the area, made me really appreciate the kind of the depth of the impact that you'd achieve there and the reach within the community. So again, thinking about how you can put and communicate your findings in context to give that sense of growth and improvement. Third area is about how you can use your findings to motivate yourself. Let's say at the beginning, you're putting in a huge amount of effort and your goodwill and your contacts into making this happen. And so when you do get positive feedback, that can be, make you realize that all your efforts are worthwhile. So taking time to reflect on the successes is really important. These are a couple of quotations from our last how are we doing survey, and we read them out to the team meeting, because normally when you're dealing with all the problems that life throws up, just taking a second to stop and read the positive feedback is really important too. And how you can take the learning and the experience you've had to create case studies. And case studies are a great place to use photos, quotations from people to reinforce and really highlight the difference that you're making in people's lives. I think Sophie in her section was talking about how important it is to have photos with people in. Often community energy seems very focused around kit and technical things, but it's the difference to people's lives. So the more photos you can get which have people in it that you're making a difference to can be really positive. And the more that you can then demonstrate to people the difference and inspire people with some of your stories, and then for us it's how we can share the learning between all of our different community groups, for example, that we give grants to, so that people go, oh, I love what they've done, that's something we could do in our community, and can I learn from what you've done? And if you're prepared as part of that to learn share your failings as well as what went well, then that's really doubly valuable. People can be a bit coy about sharing what went wrong, but actually that can also often be the most important thing that you can share with another organisation. And in terms of that motivating people, we've started collating not only where all of our solar panels are in Oxfordshire, but we've also asked people who've got their own solar panels or done energy efficiency projects to start to put them onto a map that we call the People's Power Station. And it's beginning to show where you fit collectively. It can be quite hard to feel like you're really making a difference when you're just thinking about your own organisation. But when you can start to see all that collective actions that's happening and starting to talk and meet with other like-minded people who are working on this, you begin to get a better sense of what's happening at a national level. Mary mentioned Community Energy England, and all those tools, or their monitoring tools that they do, it's based on a survey that they do to all of the different community energy organisations across the country, and they pull that together into a state of the sector report. So how collectively as as a movement, Community Energy is having a report, and we're particularly proud because that photo that they've just chosen for their new front cover is our hydro at Sanford. So it's how on earth with a large bit of engineering kit you can get people into a photo. So really, just to reiterate, it's as important to think how you use that findings, either to reflect and improve your own findings, to encourage other people to work with you and to give you more resources to do more of what you like to do, or to inspire others, is as an important a part of that setting of your impact strategy, and actually starts to leverage the impact that you're having beyond your own organisation or beyond your original strategy, as much as the actual activity that you're doing yourself. So last couple of seconds, any questions?
May I make a comment, Saskia?
Absolutely.
One of the benefits, if there is any, from the COVID-19 crisis has been things like Zoom. And down here we have a University of the Third Age, and Ray Holland, who's one of our directors, and I were asked to give a couple of quick chats about young community energy. And Ray gave this brilliant talk about how it works and what the grid does and what the future might hold. And I gave a fairly mundane talk about our community fund. But then what happened was we were asked to redo the community fund talk for one of our parish councils. And so what we decided that we would do is that we would record them, just as this one is being recorded now, and we put it on the website and the Facebook. And I know nothing very much about these, but Tracy tells me that those sorts of things have now been watched, you know, just in a week or so, at least 100, probably 150 times. So we're reaching out to people by new mechanisms. And what people want is they want to be told a good story rather than the bad stuff. We've got some 467 views. Blimey. Yes,
that's phenomenal.
Yes, it is. Well, there we are. You see, people want to know about it, and people want a good news story. And we are a good news story, and I think we forget that too often.
And absolutely, I mean, I say you can measure things till your heart's content, but you tend to get into that case where you know the price of everything and the value of nothing.
Yes.
And how do you connect people's hearts as much as their heads? And it's those stories and talking about the difference you've made to individuals is just as important as some of those stats and figures, and getting out and sharing that.
Yeah, and I think one of the things.
Thank you for doing that.
No, it's a pleasure. One of the things that came through very neatly was a feedback that I had from one of our grantees, who said something along the lines of, "You're not doing anything, you're just giving us money. We're doing the work." And I thought, yeah, that's a damn good thing. It actually is. And I try now and make it all the time, that all we're doing is acting as a catalyst, and then showing pictures of people with spades in their hands, you know, doing the back-breaking work, and then showing the product of that work. And that is something I think really engages people about what the transformative abilities of this sort of process is.
Yeah, and sharing those ideas of, you know, what people have used the money for in a way to inspire other groups that then, it's that catalyzing effect. And I do think as community energy, for me, the word is catalyze. It's what we can do with this opportunity that we've got in our local community and as a broader community too.
And if I can just come back to power to change, having said, you know, they're very they can be, some of the indicators they're interested in are very economic focused. You know, that's why they're funding Core and Next Gen, is for that wider impact of empowering those communities, isn't it? All that stuff that's rippling out, catalyzed by the funding. That's fantastic to hear.
So we're at the end of time. If anyone has any other, I can stick around if anyone has any burning questions. Otherwise, to say the slides will be available, and we are just finalising some additional support that we could give people on a sort of more bespoke basis. So that's you know, watch this space on that as well.
That's brilliant. Thanks very much, Saskia, and thanks very much, Mary, as well for that. That was great. Just for everyone's information, the next webinar that we're going to be running is on next Tuesday, the 14th of July, and again it's at 5 p.m. And that one will be on managing a community benefit fund. So thanks again to presenters, and thanks for everyone for joining and your questions. And as Saskia said, we'll make everything available, including the recording, and hope to see you all next week.